على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Inshallah, I'm hoping the internet connection remains consistent. If at any point it fails, I'm just gonna call one of the attendees and basically do it like last session through a WhatsApp call. But inshallah, so far it seems to be good. So last week we finished with our introduction of the history portion of the Hadith. How the compiled, what were the different genres of Hadith books that were compiled by different scholars. And then at the end we looked at some of our major books and the number of ahadith in them and so on. And then we also quickly looked through some of the major Sunni books, although not in too much detail, but we just took a glance of them and just to show like, okay, look how many ahadith they have in their books. And the years that they were written. Obviously these slides are available. You can download them from the same page that you accessed the course. You can download the slides yourself and you can keep them for yourself. Before I continue with this slide that we have right now, I just want to address one question from last week. One of the brothers asked about the problem of Sunni ahadith in our books. I just want to clarify one more point about that, because I think because it was the end of the session, I rushed my response to that. See, when we say there are some hadiths in our books, it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. Because, for example, we're going to do Al-Kafi, the book Al-Kafi. In Al-Kafi, we have one of the narrators whose name is Sakuni. Okay, we have many narrations from a person named Sakuni, and majority of the scholars have all agreed that this person was actually a Sunni at the time of Imam Sadiq. And interestingly speaking, a lot of the prophetic narrations that we have, so narrations where Imam Sadiq is quoting something from the Prophet or Amir al-Mu'mineen, mostly the Prophet and stuff, we find Imam Sadiq actually reporting those ahadith to Sakuni, who was a Sunni. Okay, and many scholars have justified this by saying, look, he didn't necessarily believe in the imamat of the Imam, but in order to get him to accept what Imam Sadiq would refer to, the prophetic traditions. So, you could even look at this as a narration from a Sunni in our books. Okay, but this is something that all the scholars agree that these specific traditions are reliable. We can even act on them because Sakuni was someone who was trustworthy at the end of the day. So we have some Sunni traditions that are like this. On the other hand, we have some scholars, some of our major scholars, including Sheikh Kulaini or Sheikh Saduq, they would actually go out of their way to mention Sunni hadith in their books. Okay, obviously those that they accepted, it wasn't just an infiltration, fabrications. No, some of these ahadith, these scholars themselves accepted because of the different evidence that we had that the Prophet actually said certain traditions. Obviously, most of the Sunni ahadith, they're all traditions from the Prophet. And like the Amalis, if you recall, I mentioned last time there was a genre called the dictations. In these books, in certain sections, you will find very explicit Sunni ahadith. Even the chains are all Sunni narrators. And these scholars, some of them, when they would quote them, they accepted the contents of these traditions. So I just wanted to clarify from last week that just because we have certain Sunni traditions, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative thing. Okay, it's not necessarily a negative thing. By the way, on the contrary, I just want to mention this. The Sunnis also have many ahadith from our Imams, believe it or not. So they have ahadith from Imam Sajjad, Imam Baqir, Imam Sadiq, even Imam Qadim and Imam Rida. Okay, there's a book that was published a few years ago called Fiqhul Al. It's around 1,000 pages. It's a very long book. And in that book, the author, there's two attacks that are made from both the Shi'as and the Sunnis. The Sunnis say to the Shias that your ahadith that you have from Imam Sadiq or Imam Baqir, these are all fabricated. You guys just made these ahadith up. And the Shias were always telling the Sunnis, how come you don't have anything in your books from Imam Sadiq and Imam Baqir? Because, okay, if you have something from Abu Hanifa or for example Malik and Shafi'i and so on, and other scholars, Imam Sadiq, at the end of the day, in your eyes, he was also a scholar. Fine, you don't believe he's an Imam, he was the scholar, yet you don't have anything from him. So this researcher, in his research book, which I have, he dismisses both of these claims. He says, first of all, the Sunnis do have many ahadith from Imam Sadiq and some of the Imams, from the perspective that they were also mujtahids, because the Sunnis believe Imam Sadiq was a mujtahid, just like Abu Hanifa, let's say. And he's also dismissing the attack of the Shias that the Sunnis don't have anything. Okay, he says no, the Sunnis have things in their books, and he's dismissing the attack of the Sunnis, which say that all your ahadiths are fabricated, because he tries to say that, look, those same ahadiths that the Shias have from Imam Sadiq, you also have them in your own books from Imam Sadiq. Okay, your earlier scholars would quote them. So it's actually a very interesting book. It's a very long book. It's very interesting. I just wanted to mention that just to sort of, clarify that there's a lot more to the discussion than just saying there's a few Sunni hadiths in our books and, that's a problem. No, that's not necessarily a problem. Sometimes it could be a problem and sometimes it's not a problem. So I hope that was a bit more clarification from last week. Inshallah, this week we want to now look at some of our major works. Okay, if you recall, last week I mentioned that we have, just like the Sunnis have their 6 main works, we also have 4 main works, and we're going to actually go through all 4 of them. I'm going to go through all 4 of them today, and at the end I'm going to go through one other one, Bihar al-Anwar, because that's also a popular work, and inshallah we're going to end it with one last slide after that. So let's begin with the first book. It's called Al-Kafi. Al-Kafi meaning, it is sufficient, the sufficient book. Something that suffices for your needs, for your knowledge. Okay, it's written by Sheikh Kulaini. Okay, Sheikh Kulaini. As you can see, he died in 329 Hijri, 940 CE. Basically, this is the time of Ghaibat al-Sughra. It's the time of Ghaibat al-Sughra. Okay, so time of Imam Mahdi while he was in al-Ghaiba, the minor occultation. Sheikh Kulaini is from Iran, from a village called Kulain or Kulin. We don't know how it's pronounced, and we don't even know where this village. There are four places which have been mentioned in books of geography, from ancient books of geography, that mention that there's a place called Kulain in different places. One of them is near Ray, which is near modern day Tehran. One of them is south of Iran, and so on. So we don't really know which Kulain is this. It's possible it could have been from Ray, which was the major city that time. So he's from this village. He's growing up. Okay, we don't have anything about his earlier life. We don't know, at what age did he become a scholar? Who were his teachers? And during the earlier part of his life, what was going on? We don't really know much. We do have names of his uncles, who he narrates from in Al-Kafi. Okay, later on. So that's how we know that, okay, he had an uncle, for example, or we know that his father was also, someone important. But we don't really have much biographical data about his earlier life, which is actually the case for scholars, because they become important once they became scholars and once they wrote their books. Al-Kafi, which is the most important book that we have, it took around 20 years to compile. Okay, 20 years. So imagine a person who's trying to compile a book. It takes 20 years just to collect the ahadith and put them in one book. In order to do that, so look, if he is dying in 329 Hijri, so we're assuming that he started collecting these ahadith way before, 20 years. Because 20 years he just took to compile it and put the ordering of the book and pick and choose. Okay, right? He must have been a scholar before he started writing this book. So what he did in order to write this book is that he would travel to many cities. Okay, just a few ones that I've mentioned here are Ray, and it's possible he must have traveled to Nishabur as well. Okay, and each of these cities, when they would visit, they would spend time there. They would go to the scholars. Sometimes they would be Shia scholars, and sometimes they would actually go to the Sunni scholars. And this was very common, especially in Baghdad. Sheikh Mufid, for example, who's one of our important scholars, he even had Sunni teachers. Okay, or Sayyid Murtada, who is the brother of Sayyid Radi, who wrote Nahj al-Balagha, his brother, Sayyid Murtada, he had Sunni students in his class. So in Baghdad, it was very common. Okay, it was the Hawza at the time in the third, fourth century. So this was common. This was actually happening. So he took 20 years, and over the span of 20 years, he had around 35 teachers. I want to make one more clarification. When we say teachers for these earlier scholars, because sometimes you may hear, for example, Sheikh Mufid was a student of Sheikh Saduq, meaning Sheikh Saduq of Sheikh Mufid. See, the word teacher is a translation of Sheikh or Mashayikh. Mashayikh meaning plural. It's a plural of, Mashayikh and so on, teachers. This doesn't mean teacher in the sense that we understand today, by the way. Okay? It's not something that you just go to class and spend, one term with them. That doesn't have to be the case. Even if you report 2 or 3 or 5 traditions from somebody, that would be considered your teacher. Okay? He would be considered your teacher at that point. So just because he has 35 teachers doesn't mean that all 35 of them he spent, years and years and months and so on with them. No, that doesn't have to be the case. In fact, most of these teachers that we have, you will see that many of them, many of these scholars rely mostly on a few of these 35 teachers. Let's say in the case of Sheikh Kulaini, he has 8 main teachers who he quotes from a lot. So you can tell that out of those 35, it was 8 who we depended on a lot. Okay, this is, by the way, very similar to the Hawza today as well. For example, I'm spending 5-6 years here. Let's say I've learned from a lot of teachers. Okay, I've gone to a lot of teachers in the sense that I've learned something from them. So in that sense, they're a teacher. But no, that doesn't mean, okay, for example, as an example, if I go to one Ayatullah's, Ayatullah someone, his dars, for example, I go to his lesson, I've learned something from him. Okay, maybe I can say, okay, I learned something from him, he taught it to me. But that doesn't mean I have a student-teacher relationship with him now. A proper long-term one where I can go up to him and learn more and, so on and so forth. There's actually very few teachers who I am now in contact with on a regular basis. So this is how it works. Despite that, he was able to select 16,000 traditions, which we mentioned. If you look at some of the slides before, we mentioned in the chart, there's around 16,000 traditions in Al-Kafi. He chose 16,000 traditions from the roughly 40,000 that were circulating at the time. Okay, 40,000. Is my voice is it working, or someone just said the voice is not working? So I just want to know. Okay, it's working. So so basically he took 40,000. He took 16,000 from these 40,000 traditions that were circulating, and that shows us. And many people have used this as an evidence to say that, look, Sheikh Kulaini actually accepted and he agreed with pretty much most of the, if not all, most of the Al-Kafi. Okay? Because if you're going to spend, why would you be filtering these 40,000 ahadith? If you're filtering them and if you're trying to put in the effort and you're taking 20 years to compile it, it shows that what you're compiling is something that you actually rely upon. And from his introduction that he writes on the book, some people have relied on that to say that, look, Sheikh Kulaini actually agreed to everything in his book and so on. That's a separate discussion, okay? Although it becomes important because there are some traditions that today, we may not accept. Then, we may ask, okay, did Sheikh Kulaini believe in this really, or he didn't believe in this? Did he accept this? Did he not accept it? And so on. So in 327, Sheikh Kulaini left for Ray. So he was located in Ray, Shahr Ray, city of Ray, and he went towards Baghdad. And they say that the Abbasid Khalifa al-Muqtadir at that time, the Abbasid government was deteriorating anyways since a few decades before that. It was on its downfall. They say that he found it as an opportunity to go there and perhaps benefit from the teachers of Baghdad and so on. But Sheikh Kulaini passed away, and a few years after that, 329, he passed away. And his grave and his shrine is still there in Baghdad. I haven't been, but people have gone and so on. He's buried there with the same place where the 4 representatives of Imam Mahdi are buried. If I remember, that's where all of them are buried. So that's the information that we have about Sheikh Kulaini. Obviously, there's a lot more we can extract just by looking at the ahadith, by researching on his journeys and so on, who were his teachers and so on. But I think that's not really necessary for our lecture. The question here is this, though: why didn't Sheikh Kulaini, because look, he's living in the time of Ghaybat Sughra, okay, the minor occultation. Why didn't he just one of the representatives and ask them to, get it confirmed from Imam Mahdi himself? It would have made life easier for us. Imam Mahdi could have just said, you know what, everything is okay in this book, or, maybe take this stuff out from the book and so on. Why didn't he do this? This is a very interesting question. Okay, this is a very interesting question. Some later Akhbari scholars did try to make up an excuse by saying that no, Sheikh Kulaini did do this, but there's no evidence for that. One of the responses that is generally given, and one of the scholars, his name is Agha Buzurg Tehrani, who died in the middle of the 20th century, 1950s or something like that. I don't remember exactly. A very important scholar. He has a whole treatise written on it. So somebody asked him a question, the same question. Why didn't Sheikh Kulaini give it to the representatives, and they would have confirmed it? And he has actually, it's a few pages long. And his conclusion, his summary response is basically that, look, when do you feel the need to confirm something from anybody? Okay? The reason or the instance that you're going to feel that need is if you don't have itminan yourself. Okay? If you're not sure about it yourself. Okay? So what he is saying that, look, at the time of Sheikh Kulaini, when he's compiling these ahadith, and you're seeing that he's putting in the effort in making sure that what he's compiling is, he has itminan, he's sure that these riwayat are from the imams. Okay, because remember, we also mentioned in one of our earlier slides that there were 400 original books that were written, and these were directly from the imams and so on. He was relying on those books, obviously with a little bit of his own research and so on. Al-Tehrani in his response says that, look, he was sure that these riwayat that he ended up compiling are from the imams. Okay, hence why would he feel the need to go give it to the representatives, who were most of the times not even where Sheikh Kulaini was anyways, and get a approval from Imam Mahdi? Okay, because remember, guys, the actual representatives of the imams, the 4 representatives that we have, there is no real evidence to say that they were actually hadith scholars themselves. Okay, there's no evidence for that. As a matter of fact, we have evidence on the contrary. They were mostly taking care of the communication between the imams and Imam Mahdi and the Shias. That's what we have strong evidence for. But to say that, okay, they would have been able to confirm it themselves, or maybe so on, we couldn't have relied upon that. And Sheikh Kulaini himself had no reason to do that. There has to be a reason why you would want to do that. That's how he justifies it. But at the end of the day, whatever Sheikh Kulaini's reason was, we know that he didn't do that. And Agha Buzurg Tehrani himself says that the problem occurs when it comes to us, because we don't have the same contextual evidence that Sheikh Kulaini had. Okay? For example, right now I'm speaking to you guys, even though this is not a good example, but let's just say I'm speaking to you guys right now. You have a context, okay? You have a context with you. You're listening to my tones. You're listening to the fact that this is a computer screen. There's a PowerPoint slide. We're on this webinar and so on. Now, if someone just takes a little bit of my sentence from here and just transcribes it and publishes it online, they can misuse it, they can misattribute it, and they can misunderstand it. So because why? Because a lot of the context that you guys are getting goes missing in that process. But we're trying to say that, look, Sheikh Kulaini's time, there's a lot of context prevalent. For example, who are these individuals that are narrating? Okay, he knew a lot of these people. Okay, he knew a lot of these people. He was able to, for example, when the ahadith were read, there could have been, for example, they could have been recited, the hadith could have been recited in the same tones that they had been originally heard from the imam. Okay, so all these contexts, the context that he had was much greater than what we have today, and hence he didn't feel the need to do, give it to Imam Mahdi to get his approval and so on. That's what Agha Budur Tehrani has to say about it. Although there's more, reasons and so as well, so on. So that was just to do with Sheikh Kulaini. Now we want to talk about the book itself, Al-Kafi. What's up with it? Like, why is it such an important book? The book itself is divided into three major, I guess, segments, you can call it, three major books. I don't know how you would want to define it or categorize. Three major segments. One of them is called Usul al-Kafi, which is 2 volumes, or at least one of the publication is 2 volumes. And then you have Furu al-Kafi and you have Rawdat al-Kafi. Okay? So Usul al-Kafi, basically principles, if you want to call it. These 2 volumes speak about the theology, okay, and ethics and history. Okay? That's why it's called principles. Okay, principles from Al-Kafi, because your theology, your ethics, and your history will become the basis for what? For Furu al-Kafi, which is now the ahadith about fiqh. Okay, that's what Furu means. Furu means branches. And Furu al-Din, for example. Right? So you have Salat, Sawm, and on fiqh. So Furu al-Kafi, he discusses all those chapters. So every tradition that you have about Salat, Taharat, Hajj, Nikah, anything, he brings it in Furu al-Kafi. Then you have Rawdat al-Kafi, which is the last volume. And this last volume is basically, it contains letters and, sermons. It's like, there's like longer sermons in them, for example, longer letters. There's not very clear why he separated Rawdat al-Kafi. It's not very clear for us. There are some scholars who speculate, but even they will say that, look, it's not very clear to us. Like, why did he put this in a different book? Why couldn't he have just brought this under Usul and put it in the history section, for example, or just make another chapter for it? Who knows? Right? It's not clear. So that's how the book is divided. Now, from the first 2 Usul al-Kafi, we have some major sections that are part of it. Okay? Because if you see, I've written that Al-Kafi is an identity document for the Shia. What do I mean by identity document? For example, we talk about Shia identity and Muslim identity and all this whole talk about identity today, especially in the West and especially in Canada. See, for the Shias, the worldview that we have developed, you can, more or less that we have developed, you can trace it back to Al-Kafi. Okay, you can trace it back to Usul al-Kafi. And that is actually, someone would say that is actually the basis that we have today. If you want, the approval of the Imams, so to speak. Al-Kafi, for example, begins, the first chapter, the Usul al-Kafi that it has, is called the Book of Intellect and Jahl. Jahl in different ways. I'm just calling it ignorance for, like convenience. Intellect and ignorance. And that starts off with a hadith about the intellect on its own. What is the aql? What is the aql? If you notice, within Shi'i theology, we have a huge emphasis on the intellect. If you go to any theology class, any theology session, you will see that we will first try to prove things through the intellect. Okay, we're not going to come to a theology class on the first day and say Quran says believe in Allah and hence we should believe in Allah. You're never going to see a Shia class that does that. Shia class on theology that does that. It will always be, okay, let's see if we can figure it out with the intellect first. Okay, this emphasis on the intellect, we have a hadith to back this sort of attitude up. Okay, the status of the intellect in our riwayat, it's very obvious. It's very clear that it's very significant. It's very hujjah, it's a dalil. There's all these terms that are used for it. Okay, it's a rasul, it's a nabi. There's all these terms that people have used and ulama have used, but it's an internal dalil. It's an internal guide. The intellect. Okay, the external guide being the prophet in one of the riwayat. That's how it's mentioned. Then you have right after that, you have the merits of knowledge. So look, first, as a preliminary, the first chapter in Al-Kafi is to do with the intellect. And right after that, it's about the merits of knowledge, the virtue of knowledge. Okay. So you see, if you compare this to, like, for example, let's say the Sunni books, they don't have, this is not how the structure of their books work. Okay. It's very interesting. The riwayat that we have about the intellect, they also have them, at least some of them, in their books. But their scholars, they just said they're fabricated. Okay. Because they just accept whatever reasons. Okay. They didn't accept them. Even though we have a lot of evidence to say these are not fabricated, not the intellect ones. But look at the attitude that they have, which is, even today, for example, they follow a school of thought called the Ash'ari, which is not very pro-intellect. And hence, they rejected these ahadith. They said these are actually fabricated. Even Ibn Taymiyyah and so on, the founder of Wahhab Salafism and so on, they will say these are fabricated. So, but us is different. We're starting with the intellect, then we talk about merits of knowledge, and then we talk about Tawheed. Now, if you've been to any theology class, you will see this is actually how it works even until today. Okay. First, we're gonna say that, look, what are the tools of our knowledge? We're gonna conclude that the intellect is the most important tool because this is the one tool we can communicate with other people with as well. Okay. You can be a non-Muslim, but at least we have one mode of communication with one another, and that is the intellect. Okay. That intellect, I'm gonna come and prove to you Tawheed, for example, or for us, God first and oneness of God and so on. So I hope it makes sense why I'm saying that Al-Kafi is an identity document. This is the earliest book, the most comprehensive book, and the structure of it, and not just the structure, the hadiths themselves. Okay. The longest book that we have in Usul al-Kafi is the fourth one, which is Book of Divine Authority. It's longer than the Book of Tawheed. Okay, you may say, wait, why is it longer than Book of Tawheed? Why do we need to speak more about the Imams and the Prophet than Allah? No, it's not about speaking more or less. It's about the context, because look, this is being written at a time where there's severe attack on the Shi'as. They're saying, where's your next Imam? Where is he? Is he in Ghaiba? What kind of an Imam is this? And so on. All these questions. So he spent a lot of time filling this section up with a lot of ahadith about the Imams and their qualities. Okay, so much of what we end up believing in today about the Imams, okay, for example, they're ma'soom and they have ilmul ghaib and so many beliefs that we have about the Imams, you can trace it back to this section of Al-Kafi. Okay, this section of Al-Kafi, there's too many ahadith that you would have to read through and get an understanding of this stuff. And obviously it continues on. We have a book of belief and disbelief and book of supplications and Quran and social affairs. This is just the first, 1 and 2. It's not even in order, by the way. I'm just selecting some of the chapters, some of the sections. Okay, because we have sections on history as well and so on in Usul al-Kafi. Then you have Furu al-Kafi, which is the fiqh, and then you have Rawdatul al-Kafi, which I've already mentioned. So I hope that was clear. This is all we're going to discuss about al-Kafi. I hope that was beneficial to this. Okay. So moving to the next slide, which is the second book. The second book is written by Sheikh Saduq. Okay, and this is a long name. Most people can't pronounce it. It's called Man La Yahduruhu al-Faqih. We're just gonna call it Faqih in our when I'm speaking. Okay. Sheikh Saduq is from the city of Qom. Okay, his father is from the city of Qom. His father is buried here in Qom near the Haram. Sheikh Saduq himself is buried in Ray. He has a shrine there. And according to his own book, in one of his books, he himself mentions that I was born through the dua of Imam Mahdi. And there's a whole story behind it. His father sent a letter and so on, and Imam Mahdi prayed for, the birth of sons, for his father's sons basically, and Sheikh Saduq was born. And one of Sheikh Saduq's teachers himself would refer to him as, someone who's born with the dua of Imam Mahdi. This is written in his own book. So it's not something that was made up later on. No, he himself is telling us this. So Sheikh Saduq now, he's from Qom, and this is after Sheikh Kulaini now. Okay, this is 381 Hijri, he passed away. Okay. So he once again, studied under various teachers, especially in Qom, and he had, most importantly, was his father. He quotes a lot from his father, Ibn Babawayh, his father's name. And then eventually he moved to the city of Ray. Okay, he moved to the city of Ray, which was being run by the Buyid government, and Buyids were sort of Shia, and he was sort of under the court and so on at that time, under the governor, under the caliph, sorry. So he moved to Ray and he lived there. But then by the way, he has many books. Okay, he has 300 plus books. We don't even have most of them actually. Although we have quite a few, but we don't have most of them. But why is this specific one important? Look, for this book, he traveled to at least 20 cities to gather traditions, and we have the names of all of these cities. Okay, I've just mentioned a few here: Astarabad, okay, Jurjan, Nishapur, Mashhad, Samarkand. Samarkand, we're talking now, towards Uzbekistan, Balkh, and Samarkand, like that far up north he went. Okay, we actually had a whole hawza there in that area in Uzbekistan, what is now Uzbekistan today, Bukhara, and so on. Baghdad, Kufa, and even Makkah, Medina. Okay, he went to what is now Saudi Arabia today to meet teachers, to collect ahadith, and so on. His teachers are more than 260. Now, with that same explanation I gave about teachers in the past, okay, like it's not that he's quoting from 260 teachers all the time. No, he quotes from a very few selective teachers who are the most authoritative, that he believes that are the most authoritative, the most he's close with, and so on. One of them actually being his own father. Another one being Ibn Walid was another one of his main teachers. So he has a few select teachers. Okay, I don't know how many we could name, but it's definitely not 260. Okay, and interestingly, we also have the names of many of his students, although definitely not all of them. There's no way he had only 28 students in his lifetime. These are 28 names that we have, are those who were consistent students. Okay, and as I mentioned already, he had about 300 plus books, which we have very few left of. We don't have too many. He wrote this book called Man La Yahduru al-Faqih, and the name of, what does this mean? What does Man La Yahduru al-Faqih mean? The name translates into someone who does not have access to a faqih. A faqih meaning like a mujtahid. Someone who does not have access to a mujtahid. This is going to become very interesting for some of you at least. He wrote this book, okay, in the next slide we're going to show you what he writes himself. He actually wrote this book so that the average Shia could use it and follow it. Like today we have a Tawzi' al-Masail. Back then they didn't have Tawzi' al-Masail. They would just quote the ahadith, because the application of those ahadith was very clear for the people. Okay, unlike today, like it's difficult for us to understand. We don't know the language and so on. There's all these discussions, but at least back then it wasn't that complicated. So he wrote a book. Okay, so you can say he's almost a mujtahid in the modern terminology. He's a mujtahid, he's a marja. He wrote a book for someone who does not have access to a faqih, maybe in their city, maybe in their vicinity or whatever, and he wrote a book and follow it. This is one of the best examples we have of taqleed, that the earlier scholars were allowing for this. So all these critiques that come up around today, they're not really valid, because it's very obvious that taqleed was happening even back then. This is the best example for it. Okay, and interestingly, this book is just focusing on fiqh, because that's what do we do in taqleed in? We do taqleed in fiqh even today. The whole book is concerned with fiqhi traditions, and all of the ahadith in it are those that Sheikh Saduq himself considered reliable. So for example, when a faqih today gives a fatwa, it means that he considers this fatwa to be reliable. In Sheikh Saduq's context, he's writing a hadith which he believes to be reliable, which he acts upon. Let's go to the next slide and actually see what he has. This is my quick translation. Maybe I wasn't so precise, but quick translation for this slide. This is from his introduction to Man La Yahduru al-Faqih. Okay, he's talking about someone who basically comes to him and he says, please write a book that I don't always have a mujtahid near me. I don't always have a faqih accessible. Please write a book that we can follow. So he's writing in his introduction why he's writing this book. He says, he has asked me, he meaning the person who asked him to write a book, to author a book for him in fiqh and the halal and the haram and the laws and the regulations. Okay? Laws and regulations. Sorry. Yeah, I'm just sorry. I was just looking at what I translated laws and regulations. Shara'i wal ahkam. Okay, laws and regulations, comprising of all of that which I have written in similar works. Okay, so obviously he has many other works. He says, look, from all those works, just comprise those that are about fiqh and halal and the haram. I have hence called it a book for one who does not have a jurist, or who does not have access to a jurist, to a faqih, so that it is a marja. Okay, the reason why I didn't translate that is just to show you the words that he's using. Okay, he actually uses the word marja. Okay, so it becomes a marja for him. Okay? That he can rely upon it and that he can take from it. Okay. I wrote this book for him with the omission of the chains of tradition, chains of narration. The Ali narrated from him, and X narrated from Y, and Y narrated from whoever, so that they are not overstated, because otherwise he would have to bring them again and again and again and again for every single hadith. The 200-page book would turn into a 500-page book. Okay. Exactly, you can say that this is exactly or to how Tawzil al-Masail is written today. Some of the people ask, why doesn't the Mujtahid bring his evidence in the Tawzil al-Masail? If he were to bring his evidence in the Tawzil al-Masail, you would have to read volumes, to understand which probably most of us will never understand the evidence for it anyways. But if you were to bring it, you will never actually get to the fatwa. Okay? So he's doing the same thing here. In that context, his evidence was the chain of tradition. Who's narrating it? Okay? He says, I'm not mentioning it in this book, because it'll be redundant. Then he says, even though they have a lot of benefit, he's not denying that doesn't have benefit. Just like a faqih, if he writes a Tawzil al-Masail, maybe he will say, look, if I can bring in the evidence, it will have a lot of benefit, but look, it's not going to serve your purpose. It's going to be a waste of your time. Okay, but he says, I did not intend that what authors generally intend when writing down everything when narrating traditions. He says, look, is not what other authors intend when compiling a hadith book. Okay, what does he mean by this? He means that when you compile a hadith book, you bring in the chains one by one, because it's up for scholarly discussion, so other scholars can look at it and critique it and see, okay, who are you narrating from and so on. He says, look, that's not even my intention here. I'm writing the book for this poor fellow who doesn't know what to do. Okay, rather I intended on presenting that which I have given a fatwa based off of. Once again, I didn't translate the word fatwa just so you can see that he's using that term fatwa. Okay, he actually uses the word fatwa, or the verb for it. Fatwa off of, and I judge its correctness. I believe these are correct, and I believe they are hujjah, meaning they're my proof upon me, between me and my God. Exactly like what happens today. A mujtahid arrives at a conclusion which he believes it is hujjah between him and Allah, and his followers can follow my fatwa. Then he says, look, all of that which is in this book is taken from the famous books, and everybody relies upon them, and they're referred to by these scholars. So I'm not making anything up. I'm not adding anything weak. I'm just putting in the things that, is readily accessible and readily accepted by most scholars. And I have given a fatwa based off of these. Okay. Okay. This is to do with Sheikh Saduq. Let's go on to the third and the fourth book. The third and the fourth book are by Sheikh Tusi. Okay. If there are any questions, by the way, just type them down right now so I can remember them. I can see them at the end of the session as well. Or if it's a question immediately relevant, I can even address it on the spot. The next book is by Sheikh Tusi. Okay, 460 Hijri. So he's a 5th century now scholar. He has two of the works that, 2 of the 4 books that we have are written by Sheikh Tusi, basically. Okay. التهذيب and الاستبصار. تهذيب الأحكام and الاستبصار. Sheikh Tusi, as is obvious from his name, is from Tus, basically Mashhad area, Nishapur area, what we have today. He's born in 385 Hijri, and he moved to Baghdad in 408 Hijri. So he was very young when he moved to Baghdad. We don't really know his life between 385 and 408. It seems like he did study even during that, young age, but we don't actually have anything. There's some works that tried to extract this information, but they weren't able to figure anything out. All of that which we have about Sheikh Tusi begins from Baghdad. And what is important is that he became a very close student. As soon as he came to Baghdad, he became a student of Sheikh Mufid. Okay, for 5 years, he was a student of Sheikh Mufid. Amongst other teachers in Baghdad, they say that he had around 37 teachers. See, what is interesting here is that if you look at the Sunni Rijal works, they say that Sheikh Tusi was actually a Shafi'i. Okay, Shafi'i, any one of the schools of thought of the Sunnis, the Hanbalis and the Hanafis and so on. They say he was Shafi'i, and he came to Baghdad and he became close to Sheikh Mufid, and Sheikh Mufid basically converted him to Shi'ism. I've asked some of the historians here as well. I said, look, a whole bunch of Sunni Rijal scholars are mentioning this, but nowhere in our Shia books is this mentioned. And pretty much, 2 or 3 of the scholars that I asked, they were not convinced by what the Sunni books are saying, simply because there could have been an agenda, against, for example, Tusi or Sheikh Mufid. And not to mention the fact that our scholars don't have to shy away from saying that he was a Sunni and he converted. Okay, if there was some, because they say this about a lot of other people, that X person was this and he converted to this. This person was this and he converted to that religion, or he became a Shia. This was a Shia, he became a Sunni. We have things like that mentioned all the time. And for someone like Sheikh Tusi to have been a Shafi'i, and to convert, and for them to not mention it, that would be very, absurd for them to not have mentioned it. Okay, so that opinion is not accepted basically by Shia scholars. Sheikh Tusi, he taught more than 300 students, both Shia and Sunni, okay, in Baghdad, and then in Najaf afterwards. In 449 Hijri, okay, he moved to Najaf from Baghdad. Okay, why did he move to Najaf? See, many of these scholars were when it was Baghdad, there was one place called Karakh. Okay, this was the Shia neighborhood where most of the Shia scholars and the students were residing. And at one point, there was a huge violence that broke out between the Hanbalis and the Shias at that time. And what they did is they basically attacked, the Shias, and they burned down things and so on. And they also ended up burning Sheikh Tusi's library. Okay, they destroyed his house, and hence he was forced to move to Najaf. Okay, and if you've been to Najaf, to Imam Ali's shrine, his grave is just on the outside of. Actually, in his house. That was his house. Okay, that was his house, and he wished to be buried in his house. So if you go to his grave today, you can see it, and you can also say that this was actually where he lived. So you can see how close he was to the Haram. That was in Najaf. Sheikh Tusi is one of the most important scholars in Shi'i scholarship. Okay, because he marks an end of an era in Shi'i scholarship, and he also marks the beginning of an era. Okay, what do we mean by beginning and end of an era? See, every scholarship in every religion, okay, in every sect, they have different phases. Okay, because scholarship, they do ijtihad, they develop. Okay, they come up with new ideas, they come up with new methodologies and so on. There was a type of methodology that would take place, there was a type of scholarship that would take place before Sheikh Tusi. And then with Sheikh Tusi himself, he introduced certain new methodologies, new ways of doing things, certain new ways of doing ijtihad, much more, much better. So he also marks the end, and he also marks the beginning of an era. Okay, such an extent, like they say after Sheikh Tusi, uh, I don't know, for 200 years and so on. Although I don't know how accurate that is, but this is what is famous. They say for 200 years, nobody was doing ijtihad in the Shia scholarship. They were all just doing taqleed of Sheikh Tusi. This is not 100% accurate, but it's just talking about the general mentality that was there, because Sheikh Tusi was so important, such an important figure. It was like if today we say, Ayatollah, Imam Khomeini said this. No one would dare like refute that. No one would bother. This is important. Or Ayatollah Khoi said this. You're not gonna come, and debate Ayatollah Khoi or Imam Khomeini, because like, what are you basically at the end of the day, right? So it was almost like that sort of a mentality. Although, as I said, it's not 100%. Have some mujtahids after Sheikh Tusi as well. But the next phase was at least 200 years after that. So very important scholar. And he is a scholar who, in Arabic, they say that he is Dhu Funun. Dhu Funun is a quality, is a term that is used for somebody who, or a scholar who is an expert in pretty much everything. Okay? So right now from Sheikh Tusi, we have works on theology. We have works on fiqh. Okay, not just hadith compilations, but actual fiqh, the evidence for a fatwa and so on. We have a tafsir from him. We have rijal works from him. We have, usul works from him, usul al-fiqh, which is legal theory. We have hadith works. We even have supplications, du'as and ziyarat work from him. Everything, like anything you can imagine, we have it from Sheikh Tusi. Okay. So he was somebody who was an all-rounder. So Sheikh Tusi is one of them. Another scholar, they say Bahai was also like that, who was a much later scholar. Maybe you've heard his name, Sheikh Bahai. They say he was also like that and so on. But there are very few scholars who are this exhaustive and comprehensive in every field. Okay, this rarely happens to be the case. Sheikh Tusi was one of them. Okay, so what did he do? He wrote two of his works that we have. They became two of the four main works that we have. One of them is called Tahdhib al-Ahkam. Okay, he wrote this very early. Soon after he moved to Baghdad, he wrote this book. And it seems that he actually wrote it during the time of Sheikh Mufid, while he was still alive. So if you remember, Sheikh Tusi moved to Baghdad when he was still 20s, if I remember correctly, and Sheikh Mufid died 5 years after that. So he must have been very young when Sheikh Tusi wrote this book. Okay, but imagine the book became very important. He says in this introduction that, look, one of his friends is saying that, look, there's many ahadith in Shia works that are contradicting with one another. Okay, one hadith says this and the other one says the complete opposite, and both of them are from Imam Sadiq. So what's going on? And our opponents, whoever it may be, the Zaydis, the Sunnis, or whoever, it doesn't make any difference. Anybody who's not a Shia, they always use that against us in debates. Okay, and he says, this person is saying that some Shias have even left the religion. They're saying there's too much confusion in our books. Okay, how can you have a hadith from an imam who is saying, for example, do this, and another hadith saying don't do this? That's a contradiction. So Sheikh Tusi, what he does is that he takes the work of Sheikh Mufid. Sheikh Mufid has one work called Al-Muqni'ah, and he uses that as a basis. It's a fiqh work. And he's on. Okay, in a few places he discusses the contradicting traditions on the subject. Okay, he'll bring them and he'll address them, but as you will see in the next book, it's not as extensive as the next book. Okay, in Tahzib he tries to do it. He tries to reconcile these contradicting traditions, but it is not to the extent that he does in the next book, which we will mention. Okay, but he does do it. So what is he trying to do? He's trying to take the fatwas of Sheikh Mufid, and also he adds a few of his own, and he is bringing in the ahadith to back those up, and then if there are any contradictions in any specific chapter, he reconciles them. He says, no, this one you have to say this is mustahab. Okay, for example, if it is saying, I'll give an example when it comes to istibsar. It's a very interesting example. So, he tries different ways. For example, one of the ways is saying that Imam is. So, for example, if Imam is saying, do this, do something in one hadith, and the next one he says, don't do this. It is possible that one of them is in taqiyya, because, for example, the Sunnis also had this other view. So he's doing taqiyya in one hadith. And actually many of the hadiths are reconciled in this way. Because you can see that Imams were doing a lot of taqiyya in some of the fiqh traditions as well. Then he wrote Al-Istibsar, which is near, it's one of the, near the end of his lifetime. It's not written, that young. So obviously he has a lot more experience now. It's shorter than Tahzeeb, but he expands on this whole topic of reconciliation in a lot more depth. And he basically only brings those ahadith that have contradictions, okay, or apparent contradictions. Okay. He brings them. I was just in a class literally 2 hours ago, and it was interesting because this is what we were actually going through Tusi just 2 hours ago. It's about Salat al-Qasr, praying, breaking your salat while you're traveling. And there was two ahadith which are right against one another. They're so contradictory. And Sheikh Tusi is giving a response to that. We were just reading that a while back, so it's interesting that we're discussing it now. Okay, but because he's only bringing ahadith which are contradicting one another, it doesn't contain traditions on every topic. Okay, because perhaps not every topic has a contradicting hadith, or not every specific issue within a topic has a contradictory hadith. So only those topics and only those subjects that have a hadith which is contradicting, he'll bring those. Okay. Now, for example, let me give you an example. One of the ways Sheikh Tusi, this was really interesting. There's a hadith that says, a person comes to the that says, can we eat this animal in the desert? I don't even remember the name of the animal. It's some rodent. Okay, some sort of a rodent. And we have ahadith, many ahadith where the imam is saying, no, you're not allowed to eat this. It's haram to eat that animal. And then we have one hadith, okay, the chain is also reliable. And the person asks, can I eat this animal? And in Arabic, it says, huwa mimma yu'kal. That's all it says in Arabic. Okay, you just have a text in front of you. It says, it is from those things which is eaten. That's what the translation is. So you will say, look, this is a contradiction because we have one hadith saying it's haram. You're not allowed to eat this rodent. And this one is saying it is from those things which is eaten. So look how Sheikh Tusi reconciles this. This is a very interesting one. This one always remains in my mind. He says you have to read this from those things which is eaten in a sarcastic tone. Okay? He says this is Imam he's being sarcastic, meaning, or sarcasm or ta'ajjub, he's like shocked. Like, for example, you have to say it like this: huwa mimma yukal. Is it from it's from those things? Is it from those things which is eaten? Okay, so if you read it in that tone, the meaning completely changes. Because here the Imam is almost making fun because he's saying, look, is that something you eat? It's not something you eat, So this is how we reconciled this specific tradition, which is very interesting. And you need to be a very strong faqih, and you need to have a lot of experience with many other ahadith, or almost all of them, to be able to even think of this reconciliation, this possibility. Okay, this possibility would have never come to my mind. Okay. It never would have come to our minds, But someone like him, he thought of this, and he says, look, you read it in a sarcastic tone, and it resolves the issue. Imam is just saying, look, this is not something you eat. Like, is this something that you eat? And hence, that's just one example. Otherwise, there's many other examples and many other technicalities. This was the easiest one that I could think of. And other examples are those which are, when we say that this was a taqiyya hadith. It was said in taqiyya. Okay, so these are our four main books that we just discussed. Very important to know about these four books. Okay. This next book that I'm going to do is not one of our four main books, but because it's such an important text and it has had a lot of influence on the Shias, on the Shia scholarship and Shia culture, and also Shia identity and so on, I'm bringing this up. Okay, maybe most of you have even heard of this book. It's called Biharul Anwar. Look at the long jump. Okay, Sheikh Tusi died in 5th century. Alama Majlisi, we're talking now 1110. Hijri, okay? 1699, 1700 basically, 17th century scholar Allama Majlisi. So not very long ago, okay, 300, 400 years ago. Allama Majlisi is born in Isfahan, okay, and he belonged to a famous family. Last name was Majlisi. There's stories, why was he called? Why was his family called Majlisi? Some say it was because they would do a lot of gatherings and majalis and so on. That's one possibility. His father himself was a famous scholar, and we also have his books today. And his whole family, or many of his family members, are actually buried today in Isfahan. If you go to Isfahan, if you go, maybe you have visited, or if you go next time, try to visit this graveyard. It's the graveyard of the Majlisi family. So his wife is buried there, his father, and so on. Everybody is buried in that area. So inshallah, I'll answer those at the end now. So the names, so he has 17 teachers, okay, 17 major teachers that he had, and also he taught a lot of students, and some say that he had around 1,000 students in total. So by the way, Isfahan was the capital city at that time in the Safavid era. So he was in Isfahan, he was in the capital city, and there was a major hawza in Isfahan. So he had tons and tons of students, and he also had many teachers when he was growing up. This is an interesting calculation I was reading, that if you look at all the works written by Allama Majlisi, they did an average. They say that he would have written, at least during the span of his lifetime, 67 lines in a day, each line containing 50 words. Line. I don't know, that may sound a bit weird, but in manuscripts it's possible, especially when you cram the words together and the pages are a bit long, you can cram 50 words in one line. Okay, so 67 lines in a day. That's how much we have from Allama Majlisi. Even although maybe perhaps not all the books are available, but most of them are here. Okay, and his biggest one is Bihar al-Anwar. Now, what's interesting and important to note is that, look, the Safavid era and also Allama Majlisi himself, there was a huge akhbari tendency at that time. Okay? Akhbaris were scholars who were very, very, very lenient towards accepting ahadith. Okay, any ahadith from the Imam, they would accept them more or less. Okay, there were different types of akhbaris, some were very extreme, some were not that extreme. Allama Majlisi is somewhat in the middle. Okay, he's definitely not as extreme, up there. Like, you can't say he's very, critical either. No, he's actually, quite akhbari in one sense of the meaning. Okay, and he would, openly believe that the hadith sciences, this science has the most value compared to anything else. Every other subject, every other science, even the intellectual sciences, okay, so you have philosophy today and so on, hadith sciences are the most important and the most noble and the most valuable science. Okay, nothing compares to the hadith sciences. And therefore, his main interest was obviously hadith. So he compiled many hadith works. What was interesting about him is that he would also comment on a hadith. Okay, he would write commentaries, he would write explanations. Even in Bihar al-Anwar, which we're going to explain later in the next slide, he does that a lot. Okay, he explains many of the traditions. Okay, this hadith actually means this means that, and so on. He'll bring in practical discussions. For example, some of the hadiths, they have complicated and difficult words in them. Like you won't know them unless you have a teacher. So he explains those. Okay, he explains those difficult words. Now, Allama Majlisi, what did he do with Bihar al-Anwar? Okay, he says in his introduction, which is a introduction worthy of reading. He says, look, the most important source of knowledge is revelation, meaning the Quran, and the teachings of the infallibles, which is obviously the hadith. He says, look, I'm living in 10th, 11th century right now. Many books that were written by our companions, our scholars, some of the books are completely forgotten. Like, nobody even knows them or cares about them or remembers them. Some are actually lost, and some are almost lost. What does he mean by almost lost? Meaning there's only like one manuscript left of this. Okay? And he says, look, I better compile this encyclopedia, otherwise everything's gonna get lost. Okay, things are going to get lost, things are going to become forgotten, and I'm going to write this encyclopedic work. Okay, and he had students with him as well. Like, he didn't just do it on his own. This book took 36 years to compile. Okay, and he says in this book that he prays that this book remains an important source of reference till the zuhur of the Imam. And it's interesting that it is still an important source of reference even today. Okay, so centuries after him, it's an important source of reference. Okay, he took the assistance of many students. Okay, many students, took his work. What's it called? Helped with his work. Even the final editing, the final work that was done to the book was done after Allama Majlisi died, and it was done by his students. Okay, so Allama Majlisi final version of his book, although he saw he saw all of the book, just the final editing, as we say, he didn't see that. Okay, so what would he do? He would send his students to different cities, different countries, bring back the manuscripts, bring back the books, and in total, in his introduction, he even mentions that I've used 400 different books and treatises to compile Biharul Anwar. 400 different books. Okay, some of these books are obviously many volumes. Some of them are just one small treatise, and so on. Okay, for one of the brothers who's asking about Sheikh Saduq's 300 books, I'll just mention something on the note right now. One of the books that Sheikh Saduq had was called Madinatul Ilm. And this was a much longer book, one of the longest books he had written. This book is completely lost today. So Allama Majlisi sent his students to Yemen because they thought that perhaps the found in Yemen, someone may have it there. And they went to Yemen and they weren't able to find it. But it just shows that he sent his students to many different places to gather as much as they could. So that is the deal with Biharul Anwar. Now, the most important question and the most important discussion that takes place regarding Biharul Anwar, okay, which is the reliability. Okay, for example, if you are using your phone apps, Hadith apps and so on, most of the times or many times what you will see is, a Hadith will be coded and it will just say Biharul Anwar, volume, 40 something, and page this. Because Biharul Anwar is 110 volumes today, published in 110 volumes. And it will just say Biharul Anwar, volume this and this. Now you have to realize that, look, Biharul Anwar is not a primary source of hadith. So when hadith is in Biharul Anwar, you should know that, look, it's going to be from one of those 400 different books that he's quoting from. So you would have to actually open up Bihar, and you would have to find that hadith, and Allama Majlisi will mention that, look, this hadith is actually from Al-Kafi. This is actually from, Al-Istibsar, or from any other work. Okay, any other work, or any of those 400 works. So that's not a good way of referencing a hadith, number one. Okay, you don't reference Bihar by saying this is in Bihar. It doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't mean anything to any scholar. You have to see where did it come from, because this is not a primary source. You're talking, like 10th, 11th century Hijri, 12th century Hijri. That's like centuries after the, Imams and Prophets. How are you going to figure out if the Imam actually said this? Okay. And the second issue is that many of the hadiths that he's bringing in, not many, but quite a significant amount, is from works, because remember, he's an akhbari. He has akhbari tendencies. He quotes from a lot of works which, sometimes it's funny because he himself says, I did not find this hadith in any reliable work, but I'm bringing it in this work anyways. Okay? Why? Because remember his introduction. He's trying to say that, look, some of these books are being lost. He's trying to preserve what he has. He said, look, this is mentioned in the book. I'm gonna put it in here. And we don't actually have those original manuscripts anymore. All we have is Biharul Anwar's reference to it. So, from a historical perspective, it's an important thing to know. Okay, to see which books were there, what type of content was there, and so on. But that doesn't make it reliable. It's not trustworthy, especially when sometimes he himself is saying it's not trustworthy. Okay, sometimes we have to see what Allama Majlisi himself is saying. Okay, and like most of the works, like Al-Kafi and all the hadith works that I mentioned earlier, every hadith in Biharul Anwar has to be independently verified. Okay, the chain of narration and so on, was this this book that he found, let's just say he has 400 books that he's quoting from. Some of these books were found in random storage rooms. Okay, storage rooms. They would just go and they would find this book written by X person, and they will put it in Bihar al-Anwar. Okay, this X person's book is saying this book was written in 200 Hijri. How do you know that from 200 Hijri or 300 Hijri to 11 century 12 century Hijri, that this is the same exact manuscript, that no one changed it, no one fabricated it, no one touched it? Who even brought this manuscript here? Where did it come from? Who was the person who wrote it? You don't know any of this stuff. So how can you rely on it? Okay, this idea that I just spoke about is called wijada. Wijada means sort of lost and found. You just found something. Okay, no one gave it to you. The teacher didn't give it to you. You know that. You just found it. Okay, somebody was selling it in a book in the bazaar. Some random guy, he found a book that was passed on to him by his fathers and forefathers. He's not a scholar himself. He has nothing to do with the book. He wants to sell it in the bazaar. He's gonna get money out of it. So you go and purchase it, but now you have no clue where's this book coming from. Okay, so you have many of these books as well in Bihar. But if you recall the period that that 400 that his idea and intent was preservation, then you would appreciate the work that he did. But once again, not every hadith in it is going to be reliable. So you have to be really cautious when somebody references Bihar al-Anwar. That's all I wanted to mention about this. Inshallah, I'm just going to end off with these last two slides and I'll address the questions. These are all the translated works in English that I could think of. Okay, maybe I'm missing a few, I don't know. I tried to think of as many as I could. And the ones that are on Al-Islam, I've even put Al-Islam on it, so you guys can even access those. I'm going to quickly go through these, okay? You have Al-Kafi, which is translated. There's at least 2 translations which are complete, and 1 translation by Sheikh Rizwan Arastu from America, who's done a section of like the first 2 sections of Al-Kafi. First 2 like chapters from the first section of Al-Kafi. Okay, so you can check those out. You can Google them and you will find PDFs of it, perhaps. Okay, then you have Nahj al-Balagha. Okay, everybody knows that. You have a book called Tuhf al-Uqul. I mentioned this last week when I spoke about, I think it was the Musalsal or Musnad traditions. I spoke about Tuhf al-Uqul, where I said this book has a whole chapter for every Imam, one by one, and he'll bring all the hadiths for it. Okay, this is translated into English. Mizanul Hikmah, wisdom. This is a very good book to read for an average person. Okay, under the supervision of Ayatollah Rayshari, who is still alive today. This is on Al-Islam. You should even purchase this book if you can. Okay, it's a very good book to have. You have Al-Khisal by Sheikh Saduq. Al-Khisal talks about the qualities, different numbers. I mentioned this last week as well in one of the genres. You have Ghururul Hikam also on Al-Islam, which are just small statements from Imam Ali, small statements, 1-liner, 2-liners. You have Al-Amali of Sheikh Mufid, his dictations. Okay, this is also on Al-Islam. Kitabul Ghaiba by Sheikh Nu'mani. Sheikh Nu'mani is a student of Sheikh Kulaini. He has a Kitabul Ghaiba about the book of occultation. All the hadiths about Imam Mahdi, his birth, his Ghaiba, what are the qualities and so on. He brings it. Okay, it's a very early book. Okay, we're talking 4th century book. So it's very early. You have Kitabul Irshad of Shi'i, but his history book is like a hadith compilation. You have Uyun al-Akhbar al-Rida by Sheikh Saduq. Majority of the hadiths by Imam Rida, you're going to find it in this work. It's 2 volumes. Al-Islam has it. You have Mishkatul Anwar fi Ghurur al-Akhbar by Allama Tabrisi, al-Islam.org. This is akhlaqi riwayat are in it. You have Kamil al-Ziyara, PDF is online. This is the major work from 4th century about the ziyarat. So everything you have about ziyarat Ashura, ziyarat Imam Hussein, ziyarat of other Imams and Prophet and so on, you're going to find it in this book. Okay, you have Fadail al-Shia, okay, the merits of the Shia, Sheikh Saduq has it. Kamaluddin is also PDF is online. Kamaluddin is a book about the Ghaiba as well. Okay, Ghaiba of Imam Mahdi. Now look, Sheikh Saduq died 370 80 Hijri. So he is writing this right in the beginning of the Ghaiba period. So it's very interesting. If you read the introductions of these books, you will see the historical context that these ulama books in. Okay, you have Haqqul Yaqeen by Allama Majlisi, also almost like an akhlaqi book and so on. Okay, you have Hayatul Qulub, 3 volumes by Allama Majlisi. This is like a history book. Okay, there are some scholars who critique, some of the books, some of the hadiths in this book, because they say there's a lot of what we call Israeliyat, that these were ahadiths that were fabricated by the Christians and Jews who converted to Islam. Okay, some of the scholars take that critique on Hayatul Qulub. So if you do happen to read it, just be careful. Don't accept, everything in it. Actually, don't accept anything, completely in any of these books. Okay, these are just books for you to have, do a cursory glance on, maybe read them, just get a rough idea, and then you can go question the scholars. You have Kitab Sulaim bin Qais. This is the earliest book that we have from the Shias. Earliest book that we have. There's a lot of discussion on this, on the historical validity of it, and who is Sulaim bin Qais, and so on. All the incident of Fatimiyya, the attack on the door, and so on, you're going to find it in this book, Kitab Sulaim bin Qais. Okay. You have Kitabul Ghaiba, which is translated from Biharul Anwar. So volume 13 of Biharul Anwar is translated by Ansariyan Publications in Iran. The PDF is online. Kitabul Ghaiba. These are all the ahadiths from the different Ghaiba books that we have. Okay. You have Sunan al-Nabi by Allama Tabatabai. The Allama Tabatabai who passed away, after the revolution. You have Sunan al-Nabi, which is the, from the name, like the sunnahs of the Prophet. The different things that the Prophet would do, perfume and eating habits and so on. Allama Tabatabai has a book on that. Then you have this book that was recently translated by ICAS. It was translated as The Desire of the Aspirant on the Etiquette of the Teacher and the Student. This is it by Shahid Sani. It's a book about, teacher-student relationship. How should a teacher conduct himself or herself in class? What is expected from the student? So it talks about, the niyat, the khulus, the sincerity, and so on. And he brings ahadith on them. Then he has a book called The Heart Comforter, which he wrote when his son died. And he brought in ahadith. This is on Al-Islam, you can check it out. He brought in ahadith to console himself, so he talks about patience and, trials and tribulation and so on. Then you have one book called Combat with the Self by Sheikh Hur al-Amili. This is published by ICAT. This is one of the chapters from his Sheikh Hur al-Amili's book called Wasail al-Shia. This is also basically Jihad al-Nafs. Okay, it's akhlaqi traditions and so on. And the last one I'm going to mention is called Nahjul Fasaha it's on Al-Islam, and these are one line or statements by the Prophet, his ahadith. I'm going to mention one other thing for online riwayat. Okay, so for Mizan riwayat, you can access this website, hadith.academyofislam.com. Okay, same Academy of Islam that you guys are accessing this course from. They actually have an online hadith database, and you can search for words in it, and they will bring all the different hadiths about that topic. And it's an easy and accessible tool that you guys can use. Okay, so inshallah, my session is done. I hope it was beneficial. I want to quickly address some of the questions right now. Okay, can you talk a bit about the history of the 300 books written by Sheikh Saduq and what happened to them, and why haven't they reached us? Okay, see, so Sheikh Saduq, obviously he had many books. When scholars would write books, it would be left up to the students, or usually the students, for example, to take those and get the scribes, or sometimes the student himself would write it, or they would hire a scribe. Okay, because look, when Sheikh Saduq writes a book, then that's it. Like, it's only written on one piece of paper. That's it. It's not like today where you write it and you publish it on Amazon and you have thousands of copies made in a few days. It's not like that. It's being written on a piece of paper, and you have hundreds and hundreds of these pages. So now somebody has to come and now copy that whole book, word by word, line by line, hundreds of pages, and it takes a lot of time. And you have to hire someone to do it. A scribe is going to usually do it, okay? Students don't spend a lot of time doing that because it takes a lot of time. They don't have to always do it. Now, it is possible that some of the books that Sheikh Saduq has written, or any scholar, some of the students may have realized that, look, this is not this book, for example, we can't afford it, to get a scribe to copy it. Or perhaps it's not so important. Or perhaps they would say that, look, this is so important that never get lost. That's also possible. Because at that time, you may have written a book saying this is such an important book, this would never get lost. Okay, you may think like that, but over time, things happen and they get lost. Okay, for example, because you have to really put yourself in that historical mindset. One of the books that we had, it got lost because someone had placed it, on the roof or something, and it rained. It rained, and the rain ruined the book. So the whole book was gone down the drain, basically. Okay, this is not Sheikh Saduq's book. This is someone else's book. But I'm just showing you, like, we're not talking about the digital age right now. We're talking about 3rd, 4th century. So some scholars, some later scholars, like, they didn't care about some of the books. Or perhaps they would say, look, many of the important traditions from these books are already mentioned in, Al-Kafi, let's say, or Tahzib al-Ahkam, or one of these major books, and we don't have to, copy another book to be repetition. That's also possible. There's many reasons. There's too many reasons that occurred. Okay, and they haven't reached us, unfortunately. Obviously, today we feel this regret. It's possible some of the scholars back then didn't even imagine it would reach this stage that we're at right now. That today we're saying, I wish, this book of Sheikh Saduq was here. It would change so many things for us. At that time, when you're in that environment, like, for example, today, right? Today, like, sometimes when I'm in class, sometimes students are not taking notes in class, because they're saying, okay, this is being recorded, I can listen to it again and so on. Like, for example, this class that I'm doing right now, okay, maybe you guys are not taking notes, or it's not so important because it's being recorded. It'll be on the internet forever. From 100 years from now, someone's going to listen to it anyways. Someone can access it. But no, we don't know what's going to happen in 100 years. Okay, we may not be here. The website might not be here. Internet might not be here. Who knows? And it gets lost. So when you may be thinking that it's going to remain forever, but unfortunately, it doesn't remain forever. So you have to try your best to keep preserving these things. So I hope that will generally answer the question. There's some interesting stories about how some of the books got lost, how some of them got stolen, how, when I answered the last question about the Mongols, I'll bring that up again. Okay, what is the reasoning to consider the hadith as sarcastic and not the other contradicting one? Why not consider the other one as a example? Sure. So look, the reason why you consider that one as sarcastic is because there's not just one hadith on the other side saying it's haram. There's actually 3, 4 ahadith that say it's haram. Okay, so because you have 3, 4 over there and you only have 1 over here, and the only reason you care about this one as well is because the chain of narration is strong. Otherwise, if the chain was weak, you wouldn't even care about it. Okay, but because the chain is strong, that's why he's trying to reconcile it. So he is going to take the other ahadith for granted. For granted, he's going to say, look, we know it's haram. We have to figure this one out. Why is this hadith being mentioned? Yeah, so are there multiple instances statement? Yeah, so we do have multiple instances. That's what I'm trying to say. So that's why he does it. Okay. How were our Shia hadith resources impacted by the Mongol invasion on the Islamic Empire? So obviously, when the Mongols attacked Baghdad specifically, they attacked the libraries and so on. They burnt the books. They threw them in the the Euphrates and so on. So look, what happened with the Shia books? I've actually been trying to do some research into this, and I found some interesting things. Number one is that were there, like, this is my question I'm trying to figure out right now. How much was the Shia presence in Baghdad at the time when the Mongols attacked? Because look, the Shias had already moved to Najaf. That's where their libraries were. So this library that was attacked, how many Shia books were there inside the library? Number one. Okay, I'm not saying there were none. There must have been quite a lot, but I'm saying how many. Okay, and if there were some books in there, okay, were there no copies of that in Najaf, let's say? Okay, I'm just throwing out possibilities right now. I don't have any answers. That's number one. Secondly, I can send you some interesting manuscripts. This was really interesting that so when the books were thrown into the river, some people actually went into the river Euphrates and they took some of those books out. So they actually were able to rescue some of the books. So for example, we have a manuscript from I think Sunan of Abi Dawood, which is one of the Sunni books of Hadith. And the scribe or the person who rescues the book, he writes on it, I rescued this book Euphrates in this date and this, he writes the whole date on it, and we have this manuscript right now with us. So I'm saying, okay, perhaps there were other manuscripts that were saved as well, and perhaps within those you also had, let's say, the Shia books. That's number 2. Okay. Number 3, Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi, who was a Shia scholar. We have multiple reports mentioning that he, because he was in good ties with the Mongols, he was actually able to take with him, I don't know how, forgetting the number right now, maybe I think I read 400 if I remember correctly, basically hundreds of books with him, and he rescued them. Okay, so, and he was able to save them, and he take them to another city, if I remember. I don't know which city right now, but I'm saying, look, there's 2-3 things over here which makes you question the impact, the negative impact of the Mongol invasion on Shi'i books. How severe? Definitely, there must have been books that are now gone. 100%, I have assurance about that. But we're just talking about how severe was it. That is just a historical discussion, and we have evidence on both sides, perhaps, to say like there was a severe loss of books. But I'm saying, look, there's also evidence on the other side that says, look, there were some books that were rescued and saved, and there weren't even that many Shias in Baghdad at that time. Most of them were in Najaf and Hilla and so on. How many Shia books were there in Baghdad? So this is my response to it. Obviously, it's not a for sure certain answer. That's just a historical discussion, but I hope it at least puts some thought in your mind. So I think time is almost up. We have got 5 minutes. If there are any other questions, I can address them. Otherwise, inshallah, I have nothing else to say. Okay, and the lecture will be put up online, I guess in a few days, and the slides are already there. Working with one of the authors of our Hadith books. For Sheikh Kulaini, you can look at the translation done by Sheikh Arastu, Sheikh Rizwan Arastu. In his Al-Kafi, I believe, if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I looked at it, he does, talk about Sheikh Kulaini. And Sheikh Rizwan Arastu also has a YouTube video where he's discussing Al-Kafi. If you just Google it, YouTube it, he has a very much, lengthier explanation than the one I gave. And you guys can check it out for more information, inshallah. Sheikh Rizwan Arastu. Let me just... Yeah. Okay, brothers and sisters, Jazakallah khair. Inshallah, we'll hopefully next time, if you have another session, I'll be with you guys, inshallah. In the history of Shi'i and his late father, there are some bias. Yeah, so I haven't read the book, but the new book that was published, and I think you can buy it from the JCC bookstore, The History of Shia People, by Imran Rizvi and his father. There are biographies of some of the major Shia scholars, and they must have discussed these individuals as well. I haven't seen the book, but that's what the brother is saying. Okay, Jazakumullah khair, iltimas dua. Khuda.